Kyle Klingman with Trackwrestling. We're going down to Pella, Iowa for someone who has such a long resume. I had to write it down. Normally on introductions, I know everything, but if you look at Eric Van Clay's resume, it's Division II at Minnesota State Mankato, high school assistant wrestling coach, coached assistant coach at Division I, NAI at Great Falls head coach. Now he is at Division III Central as an athletic director and head coach of the wrestling program. Also worked with the NWCA. Eric, how are you?
I'm doing great.
When I read that, I mean, think about your diverse background here and all you've done. Do you ever step back and think about all you've done and all the places? I mean, this has been West Coast, Central Iowa, and all the way out to the East Coast. Do you think about all you've done?
Yeah, so it's funny you say that, Kyle, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit today. I often tell people my wife and I's claim to fame is our first 4 years of marriage, we lived in all 4 time zones. So some people are like, hey, once in my life I went to this place or that. I said, we literally hit all 4 time zones our first 4 years of marriage, every move which was directly related to wrestling, coaching. And I think you learn, or one of my biggest takeaways that I learned is in the sport of wrestling, it really isn't that much different in the Dalles, Oregon, as opposed to South Central Pennsylvania. It's really not. It's really not that much different, as far as Great Falls, Montana, and NAI, as far as Division I. And I say that much, not that much different. It's still blue collar. It's still people that, for the vast majority of coaches and people in it, aren't doing it for the money. They're doing it just because they love working with kids and they love the grind of it. And that's been fun. It's really been fun to see at every level. Awesome relationships. I mean, I've got a young man in Oregon that's like a little brother to me. I mean, we'll never forget him. On the flip side of it, we had a couple Division I national qualifiers. That same thing. You're like, how fun to be a part of that journey and see them accomplish their goals and every step in between. And, the other thing that I often realize, Kyle, and I say this probably as much myself as I do other people, I've had fun every step of the way. I would never say that Division I was more enjoyable than, I wasn't just an assistant high school coach. I was a volunteer assistant. So I always frame it this way. You got the head coach, and then you got 2 or 3 paid assistants. I was a volunteer. And it might have been the most fun and worthwhile experience I've ever had in my entire life, because I worked with a phenomenal coaching staff that are still friends to this day and just great kids. It was never about what the title was, what division is it. It was just fun to go on the mat every day and work with great people.
How do you balance being athletic director and head wrestling coach? That kind of makes my head spin thinking about it.
Yeah. First of all, I just think I have a phenomenal support system around me, and I've gotten really, really comfortable with delegating things. And I think people say that, like delegating things. I think you've got to be really comfortable with having so much confidence in the people around you that some things don't even get brought to your table, that they just fix it, and knowing that quite humbly, they're going to do it as good or better than you do it yourself, I also have a president that when he approached me about it 8 years ago, I made very, very clear to him, my wrestlers will always come first. I'm not going to make them have a less of an experience or not be as committed to them as I feel I should be or they need. They're always going to come first. And if that doesn't work, then we can find somebody else to do this. I still need a checks and balance, making sure that from an AD perspective, administrative perspective, that I'm doing a satisfactory job there, which I always look at that as a team approach, not just me, but I enjoy it. I really do. The busyness of the day and picking up one phone call on a sophomore that's going to get dumped by his high school girlfriend and doing some life counseling, and on the next call, talking with the CFO about what we're trying to do with a building project. I like that variety, and it's been good for me.
How have you handled this with COVID? I'm sure you're a hot commodity being an athletic director. I'm sure a lot of people want answers from you and getting calls. How do you balance that with people wanting answers? And I'm guessing you don't have a lot.
Yeah, I think part of it, what we've talked a lot about is 2 things, whether I'm talking with, wrestling coaches that are calling me every other day of what's the season going to be like, or our student athletes wanting to know, or whether it's constituents that we're working with, the 2 things that I've continued to message them is you need to be very, very flexible and adaptable. If you're very, very rigid of by golly, we've always wrestled this duel on this day, or we've always gone to this tournament, or practice has to be at 4:00, you're going to struggle. I mean, it is so ever changing that you got to be flexible, adaptable. And I think good things can come out of that. I think there's been so many, we've had several of our teams at Central who have say, in a weird sort of way, they've never felt closer to their teams. Because of NCAA restrictions, they weren't able to have team meetings during the summer. They weren't able to do things in the past. Well, now they can. And they've talked about a lot more life stuff than they have just team stuff. So I think that's number one, flexible and adaptable. And number two is just being super comfortable with saying, I don't know. I probably say that 20 times a day, to different meeting groups, and that's really, really hard for people to hear that, hey, I don't have the answers. Our president doesn't have the answers. You can call the NCAA. They don't have the answers right now. But just to be okay with saying, I don't know, but how can we maximize today? How can we make today an awesome day and really get the most out of it? But our staff and student athletes would probably say that they'd be fairly wealthy if they had $1 for every time they've heard me say flexible and adaptable, and it's okay to say I don't know. That's pretty much how we're working through it.
How did you overcome a physical disability?
Yeah, so for those who don't know, I mean, I was born with a deformed hand. That felt really normal to me. I was blessed with an awesome set of parents, a great doctor who did surgeries from the time I was 6 months old to 14 years old, and then with coaches later on who I wouldn't call it tough love, because it wasn't like they were intentionally difficult. They just never babied me. It was pretty simple. If you want to do something, figure it out. And if you lose, don't blame other people. And if you win, good for you, and let's move on to the next thing. So the thing that I guess I feel like I was fortunate about is I don't know anything different. I think in wrestling, you see such vastly different body types, right? I mean, you see the tall wrestler, the jacked wrestler, the quick one. Everybody has their own body type, and the sport allows you to adjust to it. I just smile of Anthony Robles doesn't know anything different other than wrestling with one leg. I don't know anything different than wrestling with 1.5 arms. It's the way it is. Had I had parents or coaches that I think, when I lost 3 matches or struggled, which the first to say I wasn't an outstanding wrestler, I was average on my best day, but had that been blamed on a handicap or other situation, I think I might have dealt differently. But it was the opposite. If you want to be a better wrestler, then you better work harder. It's pretty much that simple. And I've told people for probably the last 2 decades since I've gotten to coaching, I don't feel like I have a handicap. I feel like I have a blessing. I've been really, really fortunate that I can very deliberately show people why certain things have been hard in my life and how I've embraced it. And I think a lot of people, those insecurities are inside. Maybe it's lack of self-confidence. Maybe it was a tough upbringing, but nobody can see that. For me, it's super simple. When I go to a supermarket and some kid says, hey, what happened to your hand? And I tell him the dog in Sandlot bit it off. And his eyes get this big. And I said, well, no, actually, I was born that way. It's just a funnier story to know a dog bit it off. But hey, this is what makes me unique and different. And I think that's awesome. I think that's really cool that we all have differences, and the sport of wrestling's really been a great opportunity to learn to compete with that.
With you saying that, should we celebrate stories like Nick Ackerman and Anthony Robles, or are they just normal and they overcame something?
Yeah, I believe it or not, I would be in the second category. I think Nick Ackerman should be celebrated because he was a national champion. He's a phenomenal person. I think to lower the bar and say it was unique. I mean, I think outside in people will always look at it that way. So I know I'm speaking this differently than 99% of society would view it, but I look at Anthony Robles as a stud person. I don't look at him as a stud person because he had a handicap. I think he's a stud person because he's got a tremendous faith. He's unbelievably mentally tough. He worked towards his goals. I don't think it has to be an asterisk that he only has one leg. And like I said, I can say that because I consider myself somewhat in that same camp, but I don't think the bar needs to be lowered for those guys. I think it needs to be recognized that they did unbelievable accomplishments in the sport of wrestling, irregardless of what their situation was.
How would you answer the critics who say they actually have an advantage because they're heavier and they got their legs cut off?
Yeah, awesome. Anybody who wants to volunteer to have their 2 legs cut off and one and Anthony can sign up for that. I think it is unbelievable how we try to spin it in a different way of somebody without 2 legs in the case of Ackerman, or somebody Kyle Maynard a few years ago, no arms and no legs. If you want to volunteer for that, of having your arms and legs cut off and be at a lighter weight class, they can go for it. I just think it needs to be recognized for what it is. That our sport embraces different body types, and these guys are really good at finding out a way to work through those at the highest level. People often forget, and the guy he beat in the finals is a good friend of mine from Augsburg. I mean, Nick Ackerman didn't just win the national title. Nick Ackerman beat arguably the best guy in all of Division III, and Nick Slack to win it. I just think that is a remarkable accomplishment that he deserves so much credit for.
When you go through that, though, are there moments of frustration when you're at Minnesota State Mankato? Do you ever just say, gosh, if I just was, have my arm? Yeah,
and part of it is the frustration had nothing to do with my arm. It had to do with me being a bad wrestler at the time. And I think that starts with parenting at a very young age. When I go 0-3 in baseball, it's not because I can't hold the bat better. It's just you had bad swings, and I think that directly goes back to just really, really good parenting in that situation. And I'll never forget when I was in Pennsylvania, and this has happened sporadically over the years. Somebody will know my situation, or my mom was a nurse for 40 years, at times would volunteer it. But there was a friend of a friend who a family had a little girl that was born with no arms. So both of her arms are right off, a little baby, first child for this family, and just shocked and awed. And friend of a friend had said, would you mind getting together with his family? Absolutely. And I saw the girl and I just started laughing. I said, oh my gosh, are you going to have a special young lady here if you let her? And they said, what'd you say? I said, you're going to have an unbelievably special young lady here if you let her. And I said, what I mean by that is if you parent her in a way of she wants to learn how to eat a bowl of Cheerios, we'll figure it out. Put a bowl in front of her, give her a spoon, and she'll figure it out. She's going to learn an unbelievable self-confidence and independency that only she can figure out. But if you baby her every step of the way and you take that same spoon and spoon feed her, 2, 4, 10, 12, how long do you want to do it? She's going to be a victim her whole life. If she wants to play the piano, let her play the piano. She's probably going to suck at the beginning and she's going to figure out a way to do it later in life. But let her figure it out and work through that. And I think it was just a different perspective that the parents had never heard before. And like I said, I don't know if my parents planned to be that way. That was just how they parented me. And I feel really, really fortunate for that. And I think it's, like I said, I don't think I was dealt a bad hand of cards. I think I was super lucky. I would choose it the same way in a heartbeat because it's made me a better person in life and allowed me to help other people.
You were the leadership coordinator at the NWCA. What's the art to being a good leader?
I think believing very, very passionately of what the purpose is. So the example of leadership coordinator, that was the very, very earliest stages of the coaching development program that they have right now, the mentoring program, which I think is the greatest thing that's ever come out of the NWCA. I was really passionate about that. That made sense to me, but I think it's almost impossible to be a great leader if you're not passionate about what the product is, whether that's Cale Sanderson, passionate about Penn State wrestling and what they're doing, or Iowa or Ohio State or wherever that is, or at the Division III, level of Dave Mitchell, John Ostendorp, guys like that in our level that are super passionate about what they're doing. I think it all starts there. And then I think it's a matter of getting other people around you and realizing you can't do it all yourself. And that maybe goes back to your question 15 minutes ago is, I think if you're going to be an unbelievable leader and you've got really big mountains that you want to climb, you've got to figure out pretty early on, you're not going to be able to do it by yourself. You've got to get other people to help you with it. So I've really tried to, of the jobs that I've taken or the things that I've been involved with, try to choose things that are at the core of what I believe in, and then try to get other people surrounding me that are equally passionate about that.
How much does this factor in of just being able to believe the outcome that you want and then thinking about it enough and then that outcome becomes reality?
Yeah, I think it's huge. The way I've always framed it with new coaches that I hire, Kyle, is I said, you've got to see something out in the distance that nobody else can see. You've got to be able to see it. You've got to be able to think about it. You've got to be able to articulate that thing, that goal out in the distance that nobody else in the world can be able to see. And then you've got to start getting people to buy in on it. I'll never forget a conference duel that we had my first year at Central. And I knew there was no possible way we could win a duel. We started with 12 and we finished with 3 wrestlers. So you're going into a duel and you're spotting the other team 7 weights. And we wrestled a conference team that was fairly solid, and we got beat 54-0. And I honestly thought our kids gave a really good effort that night. I mean, people might be like, you felt good about 54-0. I did. We had very measurable goals of our guys that they had total control of. Simple thing, beat the guy back to the center every time. Like, I don't care where you're at on the mat. I don't care what the score is. You need to hustle and beat the guy back to the center every time, whether you're wrestling Iowa or where you're wrestling Co. So we got beat 54-0, and I'm sitting on the bench. I mean, I remember it like it was yesterday, and this is 13 and a half years ago. And I remember the assistant for the other team being like, I don't get it, man. I just couldn't do it. There's no way I could. You know, this guy had a tremendous amount of success, couple-time national champ in D3, and I just could not be a part of a team that's getting beat 54-0 on an average night. And I just smiled, and I said, it's not for everybody. It's really, really not for everybody. You've got to believe and see something that might be in the distance, and that distance could be 3, 5, 7, 10 years out there. But if you can't see it, you're not going to be able to convince other people to do it, you know. Long story short, about 7, 8 years later, that same assistant was at this program, and the first time we beat that team, they're a top 7, top 10 team in the country. The last 3 weights, all I did is looked at that other assistant and smiled and been like, it took 8 years for us to get there. Like that night, that time, and I thought the journey was worth it every step of the way. But that's not an 8-year journey of getting to that point. That's a long journey for some people if you can't see the light at the end of the road.
Of course, Central is in Division III. You're in the Iowa Conference, or the Twin Rivers Conference.
American Rivers, yep.
Rivers Conference.
American Rivers.
Of course, when you talk Division III, it's dominated by 2 schools. Augsburg and Wartburg have won it every single year since 1995. Program in your conference, Loras, is pushing the envelope. They were #1 going into the tournament. Do you like seeing that? As a competitor, do you like seeing Loras do so well?
I think what gets missed in that is it's not only Loras, it's our whole conference. You know, but by that I mean, you know, I had this conversation, I think, with Jim Miller once last year. There was a time where we had 3 of the top 5 teams in the country in our conference. And I don't think we were, you know, realistically, Central was probably in the 10 to 15 range at that time. But to have, you know, the Knights and Loras and Co was right there with them, I think that's awesome. As a competitor, if you don't want to be a part of that and know that every day you got to get better or the train's going down the tracks, I think you're in it for the wrong reasons. I've always messaged, we recruit that way at the very beginning. The first phone call or 2 that I'm making with a recruit, I say, you come to Iowa, it's the hotbed of wrestling. This is what you have a chance to compete against on a daily basis. But once again, back to the leadership thing, if you don't embrace that as a coach, that, man, it's fun to go to Cedar Rapids on a Thursday night and have a great duel in front of that crowd. If you don't have that, then it's probably not the place for you to coach. I think it's awesome. I think the level of competition in our conference and region is awesome. I told several people, and it was unfortunate that we didn't have last year's national tournament, but I thought last year's regional tournament, our lower Midwest regional, was the most intense tournament I've ever been a part of in my entire life. Way more intense than any national tournament. And what I mean by that is at nationals, whether you have 2, 4, 7 qualifiers, you at least get an hour break. At regional, you've got 10 weights. I mean, you're wrestling every 15 minutes, and every match was at that level. And I thought our guys gave as good an effort as any team I've ever coached. I've never been more proud of a team, of the effort Central's team gave at the lower Midwest regional, just because of how challenging it is. So I think it's great, and I think it's only going to get better.
We'll end with this. You went to Minnesota State Mankato, one of the great characters, one of my favorite people, Jim McCoskey. Describe Jim McCoskey.
One of a kind. Absolute one of a kind who I think has kind of become a folklore legend in our sport. And as funny and tough and everything else as he is, I think what people miss is at the core of it, he just has a passion for helping young people. My life is forever different because of Jim McCoskey, and he didn't have to do that. I was not, we've talked about it before, I was not the star on the team. I was definitely in the bottom third, and he really invested a lot into me. He made the journey fun, not just the wrestling part of it, but the van trips and the hotel rides. I mean, he he taught me to really take one day at a time and love the journey and love the process. And I'm just forever grateful. Awesome experience.
How does it work out this way that you're Dutch and you end up coaching the Dutch?
So what I've explained to people over the years is if you're a military veteran and you apply for a government job, you get extra points for that. So when I applied at Central, I don't know if I would have gotten the job, but I'm 100% Dutch, so I got bonus points for that. So it's kind of all worked out the way it should. You know, you're a Van Kley and you're at the home of the Dutch, and the rest is history 14 years later.